All right, and welcome to another edition of the 5-Star Podcast of Wrestling. I'm your host, Sean Meyers, joined by Sean Saputo here on the Skype, and we're going to go over a bunch of things today. We're going to rewind just about a week's time, go over both Raw and Smackdown last week, get some quick feedback on that, and then we're going to talk about the event that everyone was talking about over the weekend. That was the greatest Royal Rumble. 50 men in the Royal Rumble held over in Saudi Arabia. They also had, I believe, 7 titles on the line. So a lot to get to with that. But first, Sean, I want to jump into Raw and Smackdown a week ago. And I know you have to dig deep into the memory to think of it now as we're filming this Monday afternoon. But to me, especially Raw last week, it just seemed like a show that didn't have a lot of energy. And I think after WrestleMania, you get the first week where you have, the new storylines, the new superstars. The second week, they did the shakeup. This one just sort of felt a little flat, and maybe that's because of the brutal travel schedule that a lot of these guys have been on. But, it just seemed like it was lacking something, and that's not good because you want to build momentum after a WrestleMania and keep working in the right direction, going in an upward trajectory, and it seemed like, to me at least, the show sort of lacked some energy and some excitement.
Well, I think they were just trying to make it a little bit less taxing on all of them to prepare for the long travel over to Saudi. But the main thing that I think as to why Raw and both SmackDown, I think, were both very downward trending this week is, one, because of that travel, and two, the pay-per-view Backlash coming up this week, I feel like is way too close to when WrestleMania ended. And I feel like they have already put all these matches together that are just simply rematches of WrestleMania. So they really didn't need any significant build to them. And that's why they were able to kind of, in technical terms, dumb down the booking for this past week, get prepared for Saudi, and then you can have whatever happens tonight and tomorrow on Raw and SmackDown become basically it's the go home show, so you can kind of spice things up a little bit more this week and get everybody mentally prepared on Backlash. I think throwing the greatest Royal Rumble in, and then 9 days later you have another pay-per-view style-esque show, it was way too much compacted into a 2-week frame with 2 Raws, 2 SmackDowns, and basically 2 pay-per-views.
One thing we should note is that Backlash is significant because it is the first time in quite some time that it is a dual-branded pay-per-view that's not one of the big 4, if you will. Obviously, Royal Rumble, WrestleMania, SummerSlam, Survivor Series each year had included both brands, but now they're going full-time. Every pay-per-view is going to have both brands. What that really does, I'm not a fan of that, and I'll get into that in a little bit, but it makes it as though you really only need basically 3 or 4 big storylines from Raw, 3 or 4 big storylines from SmackDown. So it makes it a little bit easier to do that type of booking where you don't have to really develop 8 or 9 storylines from a particular show. You could sort of just touch on those here or there and not really make them a focal point because they're not going to make the pay-per-view Backlash. So you have 4 big matches from Raw, 4 big matches from SmackDown, and to your point, a lot of those already were in place.
Yeah, and I'm with you, though. I am not a fan of the dual-branded pay-per-views every month. I think this is going to be at least kind of a trial run as to whether or not it's going to work over the next year. But I was always the advocate of going back to the old formula where you have the 4, well, technically 5 big shows if you want to include the Money in the Bank now, because they want to use that as the 5th prime big show. And then out of the other 7 months, Raw has a much more filled roster. So have 4 Raw pay-per-views, have 3 SmackDown pay-per-views, and then have your 5, dual-branded pay-per-views that will run 4 or 5 hours, and then have your other ones that are your normal 3-hour runs.
I agree with that. Here was the issue with what they did the last year plus, almost 2 years now. They didn't have 12 pay-per-views a year. They had, I don't even know, we lost track. It had to be 18 or so.
Was it 21?
I mean, it was basically every 2 weeks there was one. And the problem with that is when you get to basically you don't even know what the next show is, what it's even called, when it is, or what brand it is, that's a problem. I would have done kind of like what you said. January, Royal Rumble. February, we'll throw in a Raw pay-per-view. If you want to get one in March, just give enough time for WrestleMania, make it a SmackDown. WrestleMania, and then you have back to Raw, back to SmackDown, whatever, up to basically you alternate one a month. That's how it used to be years ago. It would make the most sense then because when you have the individual branded pay-per-views, it allows them to really get a lot of talent on the show. So Raw can have 8 to 10 matches. Some of the lower mid-card, or at least solid mid-card guys, get their pay-per-view matches, as opposed to the way it's set up now. If you're not basically a main eventer, you're probably not getting on a pay-per-view very often.
No, and what it really is so based on these pay-per-views, you have to think you're going to have both world titles on the line. When you're in America, you're going to have both women's titles on the line. And then you have your 2 mid-card titles. So now the only thing that I can think of that's going to work for this dual-branded aspect is if they end up bumping it to all pay-per-views to 4 or 5 hours long.
Which would be disastrous in its own right.
Yeah, because you have to give an allotted amount of time, and not to mention, WrestleMania was what? 7, what was it?
It was 7 hours.
From 5 to midnight?
Yeah, it actually went a little past midnight, I think. So you're 7 plus hours.
So it was, the main card started at 5. It was a 5-hour main card. And I was reading on Dave Meltzer's match ratings, and I looked up the time. There was only 2.5 hours of wrestling in that whole 5-hour time frame. So you would end up having to put 8 matches on, 4 for each brand, in the pay-per-views, with maybe 1 interpromotional match or something along those lines. And then you're looking at 9 matches with a 4-hour time frame where you're going to get 2 hours to 2.5 hours of wrestling, which gives you many matches that are only going to last maybe 10 minutes.
So we'll get more specifically into the upcoming Backlash and maybe some of the shortcomings there. I did want to touch upon a couple things on Raw. To me, the biggest thing that stood out, and it sort of played out a few days later on the Greatest Royal Rumble, was how great Braun Strowman and Bobby Lashley were. To me, that stole the show, and I will admit, I was probably a little late to join the hype train on Braun Strowman because I sort of looked at it like this. He was not good in the Wyatt family. He really struggled there. The way that he was presented, he looked like he was overwhelmed at times, and that was to be expected because he had really no run in NXT, at least on TV. He was, doing the training and working some dark matches, but he had no run in NXT, and then they bring him up and put him in a prominent storyline with the Wyatts. When he did the reset on Raw, I really wasn't buying into it for a while, and he got better and better, and I thought his stuff with Roman was great, but I still sort of viewed him as a guy that, is he going to be able to have main event caliber matches one-on-one consistently? I'm not concerned about that anymore because even if he doesn't have great matches, which again, he's 350 pounds, you're not expecting him to have 5-star matches, his aura on Monday Night Raw just blew away everything else on the entire show. He was running around, crushing Owens, crushing Sammy. To me, that entire segment was by far the best thing that we saw on Monday night. And I think Lashley's pretty solid, and I wonder if they're going to maybe use him in a complimentary role at first, because right now he's been in a lot of tag team matches, mixed matches, but he and Strowman together, I don't think I remember a crowd being that hyped up for a tag team match that really had no significant meaning in quite some time. That was the biggest takeaway to me from Raw. It was the Braun Strowman show with Bobby Lashley playing a pretty good sidekick.
Yeah, and I think Bobby Lashley still has that nostalgia to him ever since he came back. I mean, everybody's wanted him to come back for years. He had a solid run this first time around, and then he went to TNA and really just over exceeded expectations with TNA. And I just feel like putting Bobby Lashley with Braun Strowman is a good start, more so for Bobby Lashley than Braun Strowman. So it allows the fans to get the feel of having Bobby Lashley back, but it puts Bobby Lashley with someone that has so much appeal to the fan base with Braun Strowman. And it really does make for maybe one of the more dynamic teams if they end up going this route over the next couple months. But I don't know. It just, after Greatest Royal Rumble, though, I don't see why Braun Strowman isn't in the world title picture. And if we're going to find out tonight on Raw, but I was talking to my dad who follows this as much as we do, and my dad could be a writer for this easily. It seems as if Vince may have finally pulled the Roman plug, though.
Well, I think at least they need to stop Roman versus Brock for the time being. To me, Roman's still great. I mean, I love everything about him except the way that he's being presented. And to me, they don't need to abandon pushing Roman Reigns. They need to change how they're doing it. Because he's not getting over as a face. And Justin Lowry, when we had him on a couple weeks ago, said, yeah, they try to make him sympathetic at WrestleMania by having his forehead split open and having Brock Lesnar beat him down several times leading up to it. It's just not, he's not being presented the way that he needs to be. Because think back, when he was in the Shield, wasn't he pretty over at that point?
Absolutely.
So it's not about Roman. It's not about his inability to deliver big matches or to be what you need to be the face of the company as. It's just the way that they are basically trying to continually shove him down the throats of the audience. And they just don't want it. And it's more so the smart fans, the indie fans that say, we don't want this guy, and we know Vince is trying to make him the guy, so we're going to revolt against the idea of Roman Reigns, not necessarily Roman Reigns himself.
And I think the best possible scenario with Roman and what you should do at this juncture is you need to put him into the mid-card as compared to being on the main event scene. He needs to have a strong heel turn, and over the next couple years work on gradually moving himself as a face and getting himself, the interest in the fans rather than the fans having to be force-fed him throughout the time.
Everyone's brought up the idea of how The Rock got over as a heel after failing as a face. The difference in this scenario is Roman's been on the main roster now for over 5 years, and he's had 3 or 4 WrestleMania main events and title runs as a face that really isn't working in that role. So it seems like a little late for them to try to emulate that. But I think that, as you mentioned, the heel turn is the easiest way. And at this point, I understand that he's good with merchandise with the kids and things like that. But you resisted turning John Cena for so long. I think you take the chance here with Roman. And I truly did believe after WrestleMania, when he lost and he had that weird, almost like look of disbelief as he walked to the back and they had him just walk back in silence, I said, this is going to be it. They're actually going to do it tomorrow night. They didn't. And they announced already he was going to wrestle Brock over in Saudi Arabia. And I said, oh, they're literally going to keep this exact same storyline. Now, I think you do change something. And when you look at Monday Night Raw, who's Monday Night Raw's top full-time heel right now? Full-time, not Brock.
Elias? Is there one?
That I would say, if you look at guys, what they've done in the past, Kevin Owens, maybe, but he's pretty much right now in the midst of just being squashed for a while. Him and Sammy got destroyed. They were on the wrong end of that Braun and Lashley beatdown. They're not going to be main event guys right now. Maybe in a couple months they'll work up there. you do not have a single proven main event heel that's a full-timer on Monday Night Raw right now. And I think you're right. Elias would be right up there with Kevin Owens and Sami Zayn. And then maybe if they continue to elevate Baron Corbin, he works in. But it's no one that's anywhere close to the caliber that they have on the face side. So it seems like they could really use a big-time face turning right now, couldn't they?
And the only other thought is that I could see with them not using Roman is when Dean Ambrose comes back, is he going to make a run as the top heel on Monday Night Raw?
Yeah, I thought about that as well. And that
wasn't the whole Shield situation was eventually the Shield was going to break up because Dean was going to be the one that turned on them this time in spite of what happened the first, but they never got the chance to do that because of the injury. So I don't wonder if they're waiting for Dean to get back to make that run as the top heel on Monday Night Raw.
Could you see any scenario where Roman and Dean, returning Dean Ambrose as early as tonight, start a heel group with those two?
I mean, that would be cool.
Maybe they take out Rollins. Because you know Roman can't be in the title picture again, right? I mean, you think he can at least. You never know. I mean, they seem insistent upon continuing this. But if they go away from Brock and Roman, they need something new with Roman, okay? If you have Ambrose coming back, Rollins is excelling right now. He seems a guy that's on the rise. It makes sense. Ambrose comes back and takes out Seth Rollins and aligns himself with Roman Reigns, who in the process becomes a heel. I don't think they're going to do it, but it would be a perfect opportunity to do it as early as tonight, or even the issue with tonight is you can't do that yet because you have the Roman Samoa Joe.
Which
so you push it back. You push it back a week.
That match has no intrigue anymore.
I mean, but at least for the sake of the pay-per-view, you keep Roman face for that match, and then you could maybe do this a week from now. But I don't think they're going to do it. I think they'll stay status quo, and there's even a chance that Ambrose comes back as a face, and you have a huge disparity between faces and heels.
But the question is, where are you going to throw Roman Reigns now? Because the whole point of this was you expected him to win the Universal title and then be in this Universal title feud with Samoa Joe. Now Samoa Joe's on SmackDown. So really this match coming up at Backlash has no point to it.
And I don't like how when they have the shake-up, the trades, whatever you want to consider it, it's poorly timed because you already have some storylines in place that you have set for the upcoming pay-per-view, and then you split up so many people that it's just disjointed. And you get matches like this where it's like, oh, what is the point of this match? Samoa Joe and Roman Reigns are on different shows. They can't even really go at it against each other right now on the mic. I mean, it seemed like this was not a good plan, and as you mentioned, they put too much into too short of a period of time. WrestleMania, the debuts the night after, the shake-up, the Greatest Royal Rumble, Backlash, all in a span of 30 days.
Yeah, and it just depletes everything that you can potentially build for the pay-per-view. I mean, like I said, look at the Backlash card right now. AJ Shinsuke Nakamura, rematch from Greatest Royal Rumble and WrestleMania. Alexa Bliss versus Nia Jax, rematch from WrestleMania. Roman Reigns, Samoa Joe, in a match that has no intrigue now with both wrestlers on separate cards. Ronda versus Mickie James, throw-in match that they've put in.
I was going to say, I didn't even know that was actually officially a match at this point.
I'm pretty sure it is.
That's interesting because that transitions nicely into the other thing I wanted to speak of on Raw. The main event isn't necessarily always the last segment on Raw anymore, especially during football season. The main event's usually the 10 o'clock segment. And you can kind of feel when that's the biggest segment of the night. Sometimes they still save it for 11. This past week, the final segment was Ronda Rousey coming out, interrupting the 10 women match, attacking Mickie James after she injured good friend Natalya. I'm not really seeing the correlation between Natalya and Ronda Rousey and how any of that makes sense, because Natalya was a heel on SmackDown, and we're supposed to think because she changed shows she's now likable. It doesn't. It's lazy on their part, but they wanted to throw something together quickly for Ronda Rousey.
It works perfect for Ronda. I think it is great to put Natalya on Raw with Ronda, having put one of the more proficient in-ring women wrestlers on Raw to work with Ronda to build Ronda Rousey's ability in the ring. I think that putting Natalya with her is going to do wonders for Ronda down the line in the future, having that great technical wrestler in the ring working with her, getting her into stride as to what it takes to be so proficient in the ring in the company.
So we're looking at those two probably going at it maybe later in the summer, potentially SummerSlam. I don't know if maybe they'll try to do maybe something even a little bit bigger with Ronda at SummerSlam, because Natty, as solid as she's been for a decade, she's not on the same level as a Sasha, as a Charlotte, as an Asuka, probably not even a Becky Lynch as far as fans are concerned. But we know that at some point Ronda and Natty are going to go at it. In the meantime, they have to build up their friendship and things along those lines. Ronda, in this role right now, still continues to seemingly thrive. Are you happy with how they continue to present her and how she came across on Monday? And to follow on that, how do you book her in a one-on-one match, seeing that she pretty much destroyed Mickie James in 5 seconds?
Well, I mean, I do like the way they're using Ronda. The whole point of her coming here, and they've noted it throughout her run since she came about during the Royal Rumble, was the baddest woman on the planet. And they're letting her run with that right now. So no matter what you see in terms of Ronda Rousey over the next few months, is she is going to have just as dominant of a run as Asuka had over the time frame, just because of how really badass she was in the UFC. And they're going to take it and run with it. So I like having Ronda in the situation she's in and starting her out with, very experienced veterans in the ring. Even if it's Mickie James and she took her out in 5 seconds, Mickie James has the ability to go into a match with Ronda and put on a 10-minute match in which it allows Ronda to get some work in, and Mickie James can carry that match as it goes on.
And that makes sense. Do you think they will allow it to be that long of a match, though? Would that damage Ronda? How do you make it look realistic? Because at WrestleMania they had Triple H involved, and I didn't like the idea that Stephanie was able to basically block the armbar 3 or 4 times. But you had Triple H there. It was obviously a mixed match. Now it's one-on-one for Ronda and any woman she goes against. How do you allow Mickie James to last even 10 minutes against her? It would seem like you'd almost need Mickie somehow to get outside help or just to constantly be cheating. But it's going to be difficult and interesting to see how they book these one-on-one matches with Ronda going forward for the time being, until she gets against the other superstars like a Charlotte or an Asuka, who obviously can definitely hold their own.
I think in any match, and you see it too, even with Brock Lesnar, even with Braun Strowman, how dominant they are, how they just destroy people. But no matter what, in their matches, everybody has a decent 4 or 5 minute stretch where they get to hold some offense. So you're going to have to take it with. It's something that WWE fans are going to have to sit there and just take with a grain of salt, really. Like, okay, we know really Ronda Rousey can just beat the snot out of her. So we have to see what Ronda Rousey is like when she is in difficult situations.
Would it be a situation where she makes a rookie mistake? Maybe she's too aggressive and goes head first into the pole or something along those lines? It
has to be that. That's the only way it can work out, is by having her make that rookie mistake. Mickie James takes advantage of it, or whoever she's facing, being veterans, takes advantage of it, gets a decent little 4 or 5 minute offensive run, and then Ronda, gets back into gear and then finishes it up.
I haven't seen any numbers yet, but I'd be curious to see what she's doing for the ratings on Monday Night Raw, because they can break down segment by segment exactly what the numbers are. So I would think that she's probably doing a lot to help the ratings. That's not necessarily indicative of talent, because I remember for many years all of the McMahons were the number one rating draw on weekly television. But I would think that she's probably got to be doing pretty good in that regard, and putting her in these, the 10 o'clock hour or the 11 o'clock right at the end of the show segment. I think they're doing that because they know that it's going to bring more eyes to the product.
It is going to bring more eyes. It's just there's always names that are going to draw, and her name is synonymous with sports and sports entertainment, and she is somebody that, oh, wow, Ronda's going to be doing something. Let's click in real quick and see what she's going to do. So, and she's fresh.
Right.
She's never been there before, and she's a household name from her time at UFC. So the freshness ability that she brings to the roster does give that intrigue for people to tune in and see how she is developing over her time.
Let's move to SmackDown now, the following night. And the first thing out of the shoot on SmackDown was Big Cass, again, establishing himself as a pretty prominent player. The Miz started out calling out Daniel Bryan. People had been waiting for literally years to see them go at it in the ring. This seemed like a good prelude to that on Miz TV. Didn't happen because Big Cass came out, delivered a promo that I thought was a little disjunct and all over the place, but I saw a lot of people really liked it, thought it was his best work. I didn't buy it that much, but nonetheless, he's getting a push. There's no doubt about it. He's going to be going against Daniel Bryan at Backlash. Seems like a weird match, and something that was even more strange was the way that The Miz came across in the segment on SmackDown. Big Cass, obviously the heel, Daniel Bryan the face. It almost seems like The Miz was a little bit more in the middle or on the face side during that exchange. So I'm wondering if they're ultimately going to set up that this is a union between The Miz and Big Cass, and The Miz is just kind of playing coy with it, or if they're really going to sort of change directions with The Miz. But you would think the ultimate end game for maybe a SummerSlam has to be The Miz and Daniel Bryan. So what do you make of this, with Big Cass being the first feud for Daniel Bryan and The Miz semi being involved, but at this point seemingly not on the verge of him and Daniel Bryan really going at it for a match yet?
I think it's just a play. You can't have The Miz turn face. The Miz, granted, I'm not the biggest Miz fan. He is fantastic on the mic, and his heel ability is up there, as one of the best in the company in terms of being a heel. And I like the way they're doing it, and I do think it's kind of, him playing a little coy with having Big Cass as his back answer to, trying to break down Daniel Bryan before The Miz gets his hands on him. But I will say, though, I do agree. I think that was some of Big Cass's best work on the mic. A lot of his run was with Enzo as his mouthpiece. He didn't have to say much. He just had
catchphrases, right?
He just had to be a 7-foot beast that, took out anybody in the way and, basically covered it for Enzo. And the one thing I wanted to see him really work on, because his in-ring ability isn't terrible.
I think he's solid. I think it makes sense that they pushed him as a singles guy. I just think it's a bit much right now to throw him with Daniel Bryan. But to your point you mentioned before, maybe that's what he needs to get over.
Yeah, you need to be established, and if they want to establish him as one of the top heels on SmackDown, you have to put him into a project with somebody with vast credibility. And Daniel Bryan's that guy that can help push Big Cass to the limit in the ring. And Daniel Bryan's ability on the mic will allow Big Cass to work on the mic And that's the one thing I wanted him to work on most was his mic abilities, because him on the mic was atrocious in that first run on Raw before he ended up getting injured. So work with Daniel Bryan, have Daniel Bryan push him in the ring, and if he's working with The Miz can help him on the mic, Daniel Bryan can help him on the mic, and that can only further establish him as one of the top heels and make him more relevant as compared to being just this big guy that they want to push because of, his look.
Two other things I want to get to quickly on SmackDown. The first one is the women's title. We all know the SmackDown after WrestleMania, Charlotte lost her title as Carmella cashed in. I was a little surprised that Carmella got the title, but I think the reason is you want to make sure the first ever women's Money in the Bank briefcase gets cashed in successfully so that it has meaning for future people who claim it. But to me, I'm not really into this Carmella-Charlotte thing just because it doesn't seem like it's going to be much of a contest. I mean, we all know how good Charlotte is. She's probably going to either be in the main event of WrestleMania next year or at least one of the biggest matches of all time in women's wrestling at WrestleMania next year. Do you really believe at this point that Carmella has a chance, or maybe do we get Carmella running away or getting a DQ just to extend it? But ultimately, I think we know that Charlotte's going to get the title back sooner rather than later, right?
Yeah, she's going to. And for a second, do I think Carmella can compete in a ring with Charlotte? Absolutely not. But they needed something different. Charlotte's held the title for so long, and it's all going to take place, and it's all going to have its feel. I mean, because they're going to have another women's Money in the Bank, and I just think you needed to freshen things up in the women's division. Having Charlotte break Asuka's streak was a strong start, but I just think Carmella, while she's not maybe the most proficient in ring, but she has that ability on the mic, which I think she's one of the better females on the mic. I mean, a lot of people just think she sits there and screams, but if you listen to her on the mic, especially that one night they gave her, 5-10 minutes in the ring while she had the briefcase, I mean, she was stellar. And I just think it was time to freshen things up and get a new champion, and even if it's just a transitional champion, I think Charlotte doesn't need to hold the belt, really, for the remainder of the next 5 months. You can get away with it and have Charlotte come out with it at, a Survivor Series or something, and, regain control of it and then start that build up for supposedly her and Ronda.
Well, Asuka's got to factor in at some point as well, too. And you figure a great SummerSlam match would be those two going at it again. Maybe Asuka gets the W this time, but she's got to factor in, too. So I don't see it being a long run for Carmella. Has she shown you enough, though, at this point to at least be considered among one of the top women and a deserving champion, even if it's short term?
I think she's done enough, and I think it's her mic work that allows her to, have that ability to run as a champion for a month or two. Like I said, not the most proficient in ring, still has work to do, but her ability on the mic, I think, kind of counterbalances her ability in the ring.
Let's take a look at one other storyline of SmackDown. And I think it's kind of interesting, and the reason why I like it is because it adds a new element to an existing feud. That is Naomi getting involved with real-life husband, the Usos, against the Bludgeon Brothers. Now, the issue that I had with the WrestleMania match was that the Bludgeon Brothers destroyed the New Day and the Usos. And at that point, how are we going to believe either one of those teams individually would have a chance against the Bludgeon Brothers? The way that they've sort of given the Usos a chance is by getting Naomi involved. Now, it's a little bizarre that Harper and Rowan would be distracted by her because they're not typical guys. They're not supposed to come across as that. They're basically executioners. But somehow Naomi dancing distracted them long enough for one of the Usos, and admittedly I get them confused, especially because the one on Total Divas is John, and I don't know if that's Jay or Jimmy because there's way too many Jays involved. Well, nonetheless, they have Naomi involved in the storyline now, and for the first time really in a significant role on WWE TV, they're acknowledging her relationship with her husband. It's obviously been on Total Divas since the inception of that show. I saw you shaking your head there. You're not a fan of using her in this storyline, and what is this going to do to maybe even up the odds as far as the Bludgeon Brothers versus the Usos?
I don't know how you can just throw her out there and expect the Bludgeon Brothers to just all of a sudden be distracted. It kind of, and you mentioned it, basically, it just takes away the whole stick of the Bludgeon Brothers. Executioners, we go out there, we dominate, we call it a day. But for them to get sidetracked by Naomi just makes absolutely no sense. This is where SmackDown got it right in terms of the whole superstar shakeup. Is they had to freshen up that tag team division, and bringing in the Bar, bringing in Sanity, I think is really going to help further that tag team division, because it's gotten, while the Usos and the New Day, when they wrestle, it's amazing match. But they haven't been able to put those matches on with Harper and Rowan, those great matches, which is wild to think, because when Harper and Rowan were part of the Wyatt family, and you put them in a match with the New Day or the Usos, whoever, those matches were fantastic.
Yeah, they can work. There's no doubt about it. I think the bigger issue is that they're being presented to just destroy everyone, and when you're booked like that, you don't get competitive matches. So I'm wondering if this Naomi thing will change that, and we'll see much more competitive match. Now, we actually saw those teams go at it at the Greatest Royal Rumble. Bludgeon Brothers won pretty easily. The problem with that is they had no women over there. So they sort of had to stop this storyline for the show because they couldn't use Naomi in that role. One thing that I think we're going to see happen is Naomi's going to end up in a perilous situation where maybe she comes out to distract against her husband's wishes or something, and maybe she gets kidnapped. I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see what they do with this, and if this is the start of a long-term acknowledgement with Naomi and the Usos, because again, they've been kind of kept apart for the vast majority of WWE programming up until now. So now that they're finally together, I wonder if Naomi's going to be just constantly associated with them in some way or another, much like how Lana and Rusev were inseparable for years and years. Maybe Naomi's still going to, do her own wrestling, not just be a valet, but I believe that this probably will be the start of them being paired together pretty regularly.
You would think so, but I mean, I'm still the advocate that they need to click the reset button on the tag team division. I mean, aren't you getting sick of seeing the same 2-3 teams every week, week in and week out?
Yeah, it's tough, but I look at Raw and I see that they don't even have real teams. They just have guys thrown together for the most part. So, yeah, it's something that I thought years ago, probably about 3 years ago, it seemed like Triple H brought a renewed focus to tag team wrestling, and it was great for a long period of time. I hate at the Superstar shakeup that they almost always split up one or two tag teams. And they split up Gable and Benjamin this year.
They split up Gable and Jason Jordan way too early.
Right, yeah, exactly.
Split up Enzo and Cass way too early before they even got a title run.
Agreed with that.
The Revival, one of the best tag teams on NXT, completely irrelevant on Raw.
And that's a team that needed to move, I thought. That was a team, maybe you swap them with the Usos, and you give the Usos something new on Raw, and you give the Revival a reason to get a renewed push. But it didn't happen. I think, like you said, the Bar is going to help things out a little bit over on SmackDown. We'll see what they do with Sanity. I'm okay with the Usos and the Bludgeon Brothers as long as they have a more entertaining match. But again, I think you go back to WrestleMania and they messed up there because they set the precedent that who's going to be able to have competitive matches with the Bludgeon Brothers? Maybe Sanity, just because Killian Dane's a monster in his own right, but other than that, this team should squash everyone. So to go away from that, it's sort of a disconnect in terms of logic. But who knows? We'll see. We did mention that those teams wrestled on Friday at the Greatest Royal Rumble over in Saudi Arabia. Let's transition to that show. Before we get into the specific matches, Sean, I just want to explain my, complaint about how it was presented. Rumor is WWE got a ridiculous amount of money to do this show. And because of that, they kind of had to do whatever they could to make it feel like a big-time show, and probably had to meet the guidelines set forward by whoever's paying that money. So, from the Americans' perspective, you and I, it starts at noon on a Friday. That's not ideal. I understand that they have to have it, at 7 o'clock or so local time over there in Saudi Arabia. The question I have is, why is it on a Friday? Wouldn't it make more sense to have a show like that on a Saturday or on a Sunday so that people are able to watch it instead of working? So, pretty much anyone in the United States, unless they have weird job schedules like you and I, weren't able to catch any of it live. I got the first hour of it before I had to leave, actually. It just didn't have the same feeling as a big pay-per-view coming on a Sunday night. It sort of had a feeling of a glorified house show for the majority of it.
Out of my mouth. You took the words right out of my mouth. That is exactly what it was. Of course, the only titles that changed hands were the Raw tag team titles, but they were vacated. Every other title stayed the same, and then you had the 50-man Royal Rumble. So it was a glorified house show, and I think it's something that can work in the future. But if you're going to do this in the future, something like the Greatest Royal Rumble, you need to make it as to where you have it at a time in which, if you have to take out a pay-per-view for a month, use the Greatest Royal Rumble as one of your pay-per-views, storylines in which you allow titles to change. Just because if they're going to do this year in and year out, it's going to lose its aura if you're going over and they have all these title matches every year and no titles change, and then you have the Royal Rumble in which if you win you get a belt and a trophy.
Right, which the belt thing kind of was weird to me.
Is cool.
It was like, and I'll say this, I try to avoid spoilers in wrestling, period. I never read spoilers for NXT. I try to avoid stuff. I know most people in this age don't. When I said I watched the first hour of the show live, and then I had to go to work, I was on Instagram, and I accidentally came across, the first thing that popped up was a WWE feed, and it was a picture of Braun, and I saw him holding a belt, and I'm thinking, oh my goodness, he somehow beat Brock Lesnar. I don't know how, but maybe he challenged Brock Lesnar after Lesnar beat Roman, and Braun's the Universal Champion. And then I was like, oh, never mind. He just won some stupid green belt that has no meaning. So that was sort of a disappointment for a second when I thought that Braun would take the title away from Brock Lesnar. But the other issue, and you sort of alluded to this, is how do you have this like 3 weeks after WrestleMania, and then you have it 9 days before your next pay-per-view? To me, do something like this during a downtime of the year, like maybe June. Or, October. It seems like this was the worst possible time because you had so much going on. It just got lost in the shuffle, and the timing of it, combined with the travel the superstars had to go through for this. So I talked to Elias, and he had told me after Raw 2 weeks ago, they flew over to South Africa. They were over there, and they might have gone to a couple other countries in Africa. I'm not sure. Came back just to do Raw in St. Louis, and then went back over to the Middle East to do this show over in Saudi Arabia, with really no break in between, other than technically, if you want to consider it a break, the days they were flying, which that's a brutal flight either way.
Yeah.
It just seemed like it was so much that the superstars really tried to give it their all, but it just, for fans, you're exhausted after you see a 7-hour WrestleMania. 3 weeks later, you have a show that goes 5+ hours. And then you have another pay-per-view coming up. It's just like too much. I just want to scale it back and kind of say, I don't want to watch that much in one period of time. And that's not a good feeling for wrestling fans to have, is that there's just almost too much content.
Well, I hope what it does, though, too, is it negates all those special live house shows that they do on the network if they're going to do this Greatest Royal Rumble. Take out that, Madison Square Garden live show or, this live show, whatever, because they always have a couple of those a year that they put on the network as like a special show. And so I hope it negates that and they let this run as like the one big house show a year. But like I said, if they're going to make this work down the line, there has to be something that comes about where there is a build-up for it. They don't just kind of throw it together, put everything on the line. They made it sound like it was going to be, some fantastic thing, but when no titles change and you have a 50-guy Royal Rumble in which you have basically in it some top-tier guys with a lot of lower mid-card to mid-card guys and just some guys that are just absolutely irrelevant within the system. It was, you sat there and watched that match and you're looking at who's entering the ring and you're like, okay, the only people I can really sit here and say, these are the guys that could possibly win: Daniel Bryan, Braun Strowman, Elias, Dolph Ziggler, insert person here.
Yeah, it was. It had a different feeling to it. I was generally entertained by it. That being said, there was a lot of baffling aspects of it. They had some guys that I have no idea why that sumo wrestler was in it. That was. They weren't in Japan for the show, and they were in the Middle East. And then they had that gigantic guy that was bigger than Braun Strowman. I know nothing about him. I'm guessing he's not even close to being.
He's a wrestler.
What's that?
I think he's a wrestler, like in Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, he's definitely not close to being WWE television ready at this point. And then they bring back a few surprises, guys like Hornswoggle, and of course everyone knew Mysterio and Chris Jericho were going to be in it. Tucker Knight, sort of bizarre. It was weird because when you have to fill 50 spots, you're really stretching for people. So they threw some cruiserweights in there. They really pretty much just had to get everyone that they possibly could. And to your point, that a Heath Slater is not going to win, or a Kurt Hawkins is not going to win. But you kind of have to throw those guys in there. The problem I have with it is, what's the ultimate point? You mentioned, you get the trophy that I hope that's never shown again. If I hope to God that Braun doesn't have to carry that around or something for a period of time. I don't know if he's even going to use the belt again or if that will never be seen on TV either. But it didn't have a point. The 30-man Royal Rumble does. It's massive for its implications. This one was not. So the right guy won it, I think. But ultimately, does it matter?
No. But I think my two biggest takes out of the whole show was, one, Braun definitely needed to win. And two, they talk this whole time about going over there and Jinder Mahal and his ability with the fans over there. They booed him. Oh, did they boo him hard? And then
I think they booed him even more after he had the worst sell job ever on the Whisper in the Wind. My roommate called it Botchamania because between that and the infamous Titus, I have never. It has literally been years. I'm not exaggerating. It has been years since I laughed that hard. I had tears coming down my eyes.
Poor Titus can't run on those mats, man. Between his little keg fall running around the ring.
Well, so here's the thing. I didn't realize when that happened back on the original NXT. Yeah. I thought that was scripted. I really did. I thought there's no way that guy legitimately fell. Turns out he did. Because this was just absolutely... And the best thing about it, I'm sort of iffy on Corey Graves, and I think you probably know my reasons for that. But, my goodness, he was absolutely... I've never heard like an announcer lose it like that ever in WWE, where he could not control himself. It was a solid 3 minutes before he was able to like speak normally again. Cole was going nuts, calling it the greatest moment ever. And if you look in the ring after Titus comes in, you're going to see two things. You'll see several guys like going like this because they were laughing and they had to cover their faces to hide their laughter. Two, you'll see Titus get in there and just act reckless. He was so mad. He just came in swinging as hard as he could, going after everyone, stiffing the first 10 guys he ran into. So the whole thing just came across as something that will be memorable. And sometimes you have to realize wrestling is what it is. It's entertainment. Don't take it too serious. Something like this actually, I think, probably is good for the show.
But I think the best part about the whole sequence was it wasn't like he was running and just fell. He did a full baseball slide, complete body under the ring. That was the best part about it. He did.
It was like, who used to pull? Didn't someone used to pull people? I feel like I've seen like people getting pulled underneath the ring, maybe by like Kane or something like that.
I thought he was like pulling a hornswoggle.
That's what it looked like. Someone had like pulled him under there.
And then all of a sudden, like they show the replay, and he ends up doing a full head-first baseball slide with his complete body ending up under the ring. And he was probably pissed because he probably like crushed his abs off a ladder that's underneath the ring.
I was surprised he actually didn't get seriously hurt from that. I mean, again, sometimes when that happens, you don't even feel the pain because you're so fired up about it that you just get in there and just start doing whatever. But I mean, the internet, that's going to live on forever, and I truly mean that. People are already calling him the new Shockmaster and everything. The memes that came
running into Mondays like.
Oh, it was incredible. So overall, I thought the 50-man Royal Rumble, while it meant nothing, I thought it was entertaining for various reasons. A couple of the matches to me that sort of fell short. We'll get to them quickly here. Brock Lesnar, yeah, I kind of got the feeling as we got to this show that he was going to hang on. And as I have the picture of him laying here, basically unconscious on the ground as the champion, it was a ending that we've sort of seen before, where it ends because you send someone through. There's rumors that this was botched and that it wasn't supposed to end like that. I think this is exactly what WWE expected, because obviously when you go through there, the guys are going to land. Lesnar's going to land back first. Roman's going to land on top of him. So while it made no sense that they said Lesnar was the winner, this had to be the way that they drew it up all along, right?
I would say so, and now this is where tonight's going to be intriguing on Raw. Does it count that Lesnar hit, but he was still laying on the cage? That's the thing. Did he ever technically escape the cage and hit the floor? Because if you watch it, Roman spears him through the cage. Brock lands on the cage on the mat first. But for all technical purposes, which you're going to hear about tonight probably, Roman's feet hit the bare mat first.
Right.
So now it's going to be some play on, Roman got screwed. Maybe this could be the heel turn right here. How Roman gets screwed out of the title, and now he's just fed up with it, and I don't know.
I would feel a lot better if he didn't have that match with Joe in 6 days now, because I just don't think they can really do anything that edgy with him tonight. I think he kind of has to keep the same Roman persona at least for another week. But it's tough because you want to focus on what happened with him and Lesnar. So I don't know. Again, going back to it, the match is sort of what I expected. Brock matches, you get finishers within the first 3 or 4 minutes. There's not a lot of, psychological work building up things slowly. They just jump right into it. So Lesnar's there, hitting his F5. I think he hit an F5 45 seconds into the match, maybe even less than that. And then Roman's hitting Superman punches. His matches have become basically just constant finishers both ways. And it's like, well, why is this finisher the one that finally ends it? I'm not a big fan of how his matches are presented at this point, but it was sort of the ending I expected. I got the feeling as I was watching that show, this is a house show. Roman's not going to win the title here. They're not going to have him win the title at 3 o'clock in the afternoon on the East Coast and even earlier across America. I don't think it would have really worked. So I'm not surprised that Lesnar retained. The question now is, when do you have Lesnar defended again? Will it be against Roman or will it be against Braun Strowman?
It needs to be against somebody fresh. I think they got to do something different with Roman. And if they don't, shame on them, because you're giving the fans the same exact thing every time.
Last match I wanted to touch on, Undertaker and Rusev. And did not expect it to be a good match. I don't think it really was. Everyone knew The Undertaker was going to win this match. The question is, why does a match like this happen? And I have a couple thoughts. I'm not a conspiracy theorist guy, but to me, I don't think WWE wants Rusev to continue getting these huge reactions as a face. He's getting the Rusev Day chance. His merchandise has been selling like crazy. Yes, they're making some money off of it. Why do you put him in a match with The Undertaker where he's losing? No doubt about it, and it does nothing to help elevate him. And it's, sort of just a weird pairing. And why is The Undertaker, I understand, again, they're getting $200 million. They wanted everyone to be there. What does The Undertaker do from here? They go through this match. It was a pretty vanilla match. Undertaker wins, throws both Aiden English and Rusev in there. But it just had a weird feel to it. Like, Cena and Triple H is like, why is this match happening? What's the point? But those are two guys that, they're still fairly active. They can go and put on a solid match, and they don't need a big backstory behind it. An Undertaker match should have a story. It should have a reason. It's The Undertaker. Why was he in this match? Why did this match happen? And why was it Rusev that he was against? I don't know. But to me, I don't think it bodes well for Rusev going forward.
I don't think so either. I think they're kind of fed up with Rusev. They were finally putting him in a solid push. And then he goes and, basically is like ready to just walk out. So I think it was kind of a burial not trying to, be cliche here with the whole casket match, but it was kind of the burial of Rusev almost, I think.
I felt that exact same way. They put him in a casket, but between him not winning the U.S. title at WrestleMania when a lot of people thought he made the most sense, and now having him go against The Undertaker, where it almost seems like they wanted to turn fans against Rusev. You pair him with The Undertaker, well, people are going to cheer for The Undertaker, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's The Undertaker. I think they just kind of put it on just because if The Undertaker was available, getting his, chance to go over and have some international flavor, because fans all over the world love The Undertaker. So just having him in a match, especially the match that he created, I think may be more of the story of it rather than just who the randomness of his opponent was.
Last thing for you here. So this, again, glorified house show is in the rearview mirror. Some things will probably come out of it, maybe an increased role for Braun Strowman. Of course, we have new tag team champions on the Raw side, Matt Hardy and Bray Wyatt. Is there anything that Raw and Smackdown can do over the next 48 hours to truly give a legitimate build to this upcoming Backlash pay-per-view? To me, it seems like a lost cause at this point, and maybe you'll get some good matches, but it's not going to feel like a special show whatsoever. It'll actually feel like it's going to take a backseat to the greatest Royal Rumble when it's all said and done, I think.
I think it's going to, too. It's there. there's really nothing more that you can do right now to build it. And it's kind of just going to be 5 hours of plug and play over the next 2 days and see what happens, really.
All right, well, yeah, we will have to tune in tonight to Monday Night Raw, see what they have tonight in store, as well as tomorrow on SmackDown, and then we will find out if Backlash can provide really anything positive this Sunday as well. That's going to do it. The hope is, and we'll see if you're able to, if not, maybe we'll have to get a pinch hitter, to do a show before Backlash, giving some predictions. I know that it's only, as we mentioned now, 6 days away, and it really, it feels like it could be tomorrow for all I care at this point. But we'll try to come back here and give some thoughts on what happened this week, as well as make some predictions before the show as well. But that's going to do it for episode number 5 of the 5-Star Podcast of Wrestling. Again, you can check out our Twitter handle right there, 5-Star Pod Wrestle. Do some live tweeting whenever we're able to. And again, you can check out all of our episodes. They are archived on our YouTube page as well. We'll have the link to that on our Twitter. But that's going to do it for my broadcast colleague, Sean Saputo. Sean Meyers signing off. You've been watching the 5-Star Podcast of Wrestling. Thank you, and I'll see you next week.